Didn't I say in November that I needed to stop, or at least slow down, with buying books? I didn't. December was a huge haul month. Welcome to Mad on Books, where I talk about fantasy mostly, science fiction sometimes, and comics occasionally. And today it's I bought too many books. This has happened numerous times. In 2024, I want to make it a goal to buy far fewer books. I'm getting to the point where my shelves are actually full. I don't have much space. I can maybe fit one more shelf in my flat. I need to just have fewer physical books and read the ones I actually have. So I may, after this, stop doing book haul videos for the year. I usually kind of include them in the monthly wrap-up, but that's when I don't have that many books to talk about. This one is so many that I thought I would split it out into its own video and then maybe stop with book hauls. I know they do kind of well on YouTube, which is one of the tempting reasons to make them, but I'd like this to be much more about how awesome a book is rather than I just bought something. Anyway, I just bought something. I only really started reading and getting indie books in 2023. It wasn't really on my radar at all as an area of books. So I want to highlight some of the indie books first, because if anyone needs more support, it's indie authors who are doing awesome things. I've already talked about the Bloodstones. Tori, the author, Tori Tekken, sent me a e-arc copy, and I wanted to just have it in my hot little hands, so I bought the paperback. If you're interested, there's a review. You can go back and have a look. There's also an interview I did with Tori, and it's a great book. I wanted to have it on my shelf. Sienna Frost, not her real name, sent me a copy of Obsidian Awakening. I'm interested to read this. We had a really interesting conversation on Twitter when I did some critiques of covers, and we were talking about this cover, which she actually did herself. This is a rare, very rare, extremely rare example of an author doing a pretty competent job on self-designing a cover. Generally, I would say if you're a self-pub author, do not do your own cover. And a professional could surely do a better cover than this, but considering that Sienna doesn't really have huge graphic design experience or anything, she put together a pretty competent cover. I have very little idea what this is about. She has said it's pretty emotionally traumatic. There is not necessarily what you would normally label romance, but love relationships in it, and some pretty traumatic stuff happens. Other than that, I don't know much about it, but I'm looking forward to eventually reading it. Thank you, Sienna. Michael Schultheis sent me The Altar of My Fate. Also because we started it as a conversation about the cover, and I gave him some advice. Overall, I kind of like the cover, but it's got some areas that could be improved. And it's the first book of the Rostoval saga. Again, a book I know almost nothing about. I'm not sure when I will get to it, but Michael seems to be a really nice guy. I enjoyed chatting with him, and I look forward to getting to this eventually. I've talked about The Way of Edan, the first Edan trilogy book. Philip Chase is a friend. I'm by no means objective about his work, but I did really enjoy the first book. It was very clearly a setup book, and it left me with a whole bunch of questions and things I wanted to know more about, which is a good sign. So I went out and got myself the second and third in the Edan trilogy, The Prophet of Edan, Book 2, and Return to Edan, Book 3. I'm very much looking forward to these. These I will probably prioritize a bit more than some of the indie that I've been collecting on my shelf, just because I've already read the first one. I really enjoyed it, and Philip's a friend. So these will be on my list sometime in 2024, hopefully not too far in the future. If we come back to traditional pub, I picked up A Canticle for Leibowitz. It's by Walter Miller Jr. I've owned this in numerous different copies and I've given them all away. I had a copy of this with a much better cover and I gave it away to a friend. And when I went back to buy another copy, this stupid cover was the only one that was available on Amazon DE, which is a pity because I hate this, but the content is amazing. It's a story that jumps through time quite a lot. It's about a nuclear apocalypse, and there are monks who preserve human knowledge. And it jumps through time. I think it's been a while since I read it. I want to reread it this year. I think it starts before the apocalypse, and then it goes to after the apocalypse, and way after the apocalypse, and so on. And I just remember it being a remarkably good book. It's not very long, 300-ish pages, so it's a good one to slip in between some chunky boys sometime. You are maybe sick of me talking about The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez. I won't say much, just I bought a paperback edition because I plan to reread it this month in January, probably after I finish The Two Towers, and I just wanted to have it in paperback because it's easier, lighter, and this is a nice, pretty floppy paperback, which is also pretty cool. Unfortunately for me, The Broken Binding was having a sale. The Broken Binding, you may know them for some really sexy special editions, but they also just have a normal bookshop. And they had a bunch of things on sale in there, and I looked and found a few things that I had to buy. The Empires of Dust trilogy by Anna Smith Spark starts with The Court of Broken Knives. Second book is The Tower of Living and Dying, and it ends with The House of Sacrifice. These were in a package at the Broken Binding, and the package cost about as much as a hardback for some books costs. So I keep hearing about these and that they're pretty awesome and that they're grimdark, whatever that means. Everyone seems to be enjoying them. So I picked these up from the sale. As if I did not have enough chunky books in my life, this was also on sale at The Broken Binding. Jenny Wirtz, The Curse of the Mistwraith, the beginning of another really long series. And it's as thick as my spindly little computer person arms. But so many people I know and respect their opinions seem to be loving this. I really need to get into it. So now I have no excuse not to start. And Jenny Wirtz is bringing out the last book in the series this year, I think in May. So there's no excuse that the series isn't finished for those of you who are neurotic about not reading or starting a series that hasn't finished yet. You've been warned. By Force Alone by Lavi Tidar. I didn't have this on my radar at all, but one of the things that the Sunday pubs I've been doing have been awesome for, or also / horrible for, is chatting about books and then getting recommendations based not just on a really general, vague understanding of something, but really based on the conversations that we're having in the Sunday pub. And Raf Blutaxt and other people have said that this is pretty awesome for an Arthur story. Sounds like kind of a deconstruction of an Arthur story. The cover, I think, is also an awesome example of that. It's got this very traditional, very classic, very recognizable portrait of Arthur in the back where he's putting the crown on his head, but then it's got this typography over it, which is very much graffiti typography, very modern. Hi, Editing Matt here. I just realized, I didn't know this when I recorded the video, but I just found out that By Force Alone is part of a series, a quartet, tetralogy, called The Antimatter of Britain. If you are an Arthur nerd or an English history nerd or whatever, this should be funny and witty for you. The matter of Britain is sort of a term referring to all of this historical stuff like Arthur stories and that kind of thing. And calling it the antimatter of Britain is just perfect. There is a second book. It's called The Hood. And of course, it's about Robin Hood. In a similar vein, I assume, to By Force Alone. And I think that's it so far, but it's intended to be a quartet. Back to the video. I'm hesitantly optimistic about this one. Arthur and the Arthur story, specifically La Morte d'Arthur, the real classic Arthur story from the 15th century, is foundational fantasy literature for me personally. I love the Arthur story. I have maybe a very naive idea about heroes and knighthood and people actually trying to do the right thing in a difficult world and making mistakes. I don't necessarily want to have that deconstructed. But this sounded interesting, at least. It says big on the back, where there's a legend, there's a lie. So yeah, maybe it'll challenge a lot of my nostalgic Arthur coziness, but I'm up for that. I haven't read any Adrian Tchaikovsky yet. Everybody seems to be reading Adrian Tchaikovsky, and it seems like he puts out a new book every 3 months. This sounds interesting. He's known, I think, mostly for science fiction, more than fantasy, but City of Last Chances, which is the first book of... I know that this is part of a series. Publishers, make it clear on the cover what the series is and which book this is in the series. This is the first book. I know that. I know there are more. I think the second one's already out. The way Tchaikovsky publishes books, the third one will probably be out in February. No, I'm joking. It'll probably be out next year or something. I'm not sure. I'll look it up. This sounded really good. I've heard people talk about it, and it sounded really good. And it was also part of the Broken Binding sale, so I just grabbed it. I mentioned Peter Carey in my last monthly wrap-up, I think. I have read a lot of things by him. He won the Booker Prize twice, which is pretty rare. He's an Australian author, and The True History of the Kelly Gang, I'll definitely talk about this more later, but Ned Kelly is the Billy the Kid of Australia, except that he's much cooler. He built himself iron armor to take on the cops. He's a legendary robber in Australia's Western period. The True History of the Kelly Gang, though, it's really interesting because it has a lot to do with racism, or not racism, but prejudice against the Irish. The Kellys obviously were Irish. Prejudice against poor people, and a family driven by poverty to extreme actions. It's really good. I'm looking forward to reading it again. I started earlier in 2023, I started basically collecting short story collections because a short story, if it's well written, can be just as awesome as a novel, take up less of your time, and it's a perfect thing to stick in between other chunkier things. So a couple of short stories and then start a new book. So I picked up Fragile Things by Neil Gaiman, a collection of his short fictions. Somebody mentioned this to me in the Sunday pub. It sounded like it had some really, really interesting stories. I love Neil Gaiman's writing. Why would I not get this? I've mentioned The Paper Menagerie before, and this is another short story collection by Ken Liu. It was also a recommendation by someone during the Sunday pub. I loved The Paper Menagerie. The stories in there were so intense, so moving, so well written, so beautiful. And more short stories by Ken Liu, of course. I've been on a bit of a Tolkien thing lately, and I wanted to read his biography by Humphrey Carpenter. It's the official list. I don't know if it's actually an official biography, but it's the most respected biography that I've heard of. And I'm just interested in who the author actually was and knowing a bit more about him. I've heard a number of things, But to be honest, I'm not sure how much of it is kind of assumed, how much of it is accurate, etc. So I thought I'd read his biography. I also got his letters. Pretty much any self-respecting Tolkien fan who gets beyond just reading the novels will get this eventually. It's a whole bunch of letters of him discussing all sorts of things, but of course discussing what he wrote, why he wrote it, where his ideas came from, all of these sorts of things. Edited also by Humphrey Carpenter, with Christopher Tolkien, J.R. Tolkien's son. It's kind of dense typography, and the margins are kind of small. So it'll be interesting. I'll get through this as I go. I probably won't sit down and read it in one go, but I'm interested to get a little more background about where all of these amazing stories came from. And back to the Broken Binding sale and my ongoing quest to collect all of the fancy slipcase editions of the Tolkien stories. This is the Fall of Numenor in a sexy slipcase. And then nice edition with some pictures, spoilers, Numenor is Atlantis, it sinks, and little black and white, I believe those are Alan Lee, little black and white illustrations. Let me just check that really quickly so I'm not talking up my ass. Yes, with illustrations by Alan Lee. It's a gorgeous edition with all sorts of illustrations throughout, and this sexy slipcase with the symbol on it. I couldn't be happier. My Tolkien shelf is now about 1.5 meters long, and it probably will be 2.5 meters by the end of 2024. Last but not least, comics and manga. I talked in my wrap-up of December about Lone Wolf and Cub, and I know I like it. I read it years ago, so I'm going to keep reading it. I got Omnibus 2 and Omnibus 3. I also got the second omnibus of Attack on Titan. I'm not sure if I should have, to be honest. If you see my December wrap-up, I've been skeptical so far about Attack on Titan, and I've read 2.5 volumes of it, so 2/3 mostly of one of these omnibuses. We'll see how it goes. I'm kind of committed to giving it a chance. I like the artwork a lot. I think the artwork is really interesting and kind of unique in what I've seen so far of manga. So I'm committed to kind of giving it a go. I will continue through this one, and if it doesn't hook me by the end of this, then that's that. I bought The Authority. The Authority, just the first volume. Yeah, book 1. The Authority is another one of those, I guess you could call it postmodern superhero group ideas. They are superheroes who are pretty damn powerful, and they more or less say, Earth, we are saving you whether you want it or not, and you'd better not try and stop us. They're not bad guys. They're certainly doing a good thing, but they're kind of imposing their authority over everyone without any choice. It's kind of confirming for me that I'm kind of over superhero stories of any kind, even if they're postmodern deconstructions of the superhero mythology. Yeah, just all a bit juvenile, I guess, for me, which is not too surprising, but yeah. And one of my oldest favorite comics that I read in the 90s and have reread numerous times since then, I just thought I have to really have these massive leather-bound editions of The Sandman. They're gorgeous and heavy. They fall in the category of what I call table necessary books. You can't hold this and read it. You have to put it on a table. But this is just the first. There are 3 that collect the entire Sandman story, and I will be getting the other 2 at some point for sure, but as I go. And very last but not least, also a classic comic, that I've been interested, especially since I'm a bit of an Arthur nerd, and these are Arthur related at least. Prince Valiant. Prince Valiant was actually published in newspapers for many, many, many years. Started in 1937, and it's got beautiful artwork there by Hal Foster. And they've got these amazing editions, which are box sets with 3 books each. And the books, let's see if I can get one out. The books are these very large format books, which reproduce the art in its original size, I believe. Because they were in newspapers, they were actually printed pretty large. And I'm really interested to see how they actually are. I've heard a lot about them for many years and seen bits and pieces over the years, but I wanted to start, maybe if I get into them, I will eventually get all of these box sets. But I wanted to actually get my own impression, an accurate impression of what they are and how they are. So there is that. Like I said, this was maybe a slightly too large book haul month. I don't need all of these books. I will read some of these books. I may not read all of them before I even die, but I bought them, so I thought I'd share them with you. I'm, like I said, maybe not going to be doing book hauls. If you really, really, really love book hauls, let me know down in the comments. If you don't really care that much, let me know down in the comments. If you like and subscribe, that would be awesome. It really helps the channel. But I probably won't be doing these. I'll be leaving more space to do the other kind of videos that I actually enjoy doing more, even if they probably don't work as well for the algorithm. As always, I hope you are doing well. I hope you're healthy and happy. I hope you're reading awesome books, like I hope these are. And I will see you next time.